So, with Subnautica 2 now heading into early access, I wanted to go back and revisit the original game to see how well it holds up in 2026. There's a bit of a twist here, because my first ever playthrough on Subnautica was on the PC, and this time I decided to replay the entire thing on the Nintendo Switch 2. And to be honest, I think that completely changed the experience for me. I want to know whether this was a survival title that generally works handheld, because if you own the original Switch, you'll probably remember a lot of ports feeling compromised. They worked, technically, but something just didn't feel right. But with the Switch 2, that's completely shifted for me. And weirdly enough, playing Subnautica handheld actually made the immersion stronger. Sitting there with headphones on, in bed or on the sofa, and hearing the sounds of the ocean around you while diving deeper and deeper into complete darkness, it generally worked so much better than I expected. So, in this review, I want to talk about whether Subnautica is still worth revisiting now the sequel has arrived, how well the Switch 2 version performs, and whether this might actually be one of the best portable survival game experiences you can get right now. And if you'd like me to review my experience with the Switch 2 itself, let me know down in the comments. I think the reason Subnautica has always resonated with me so much is because it taps directly into one of my biggest fears: deep, open water. The thought of floating in the middle of the ocean without nothing beneath you except darkness is genuinely terrifying to me. And Subnautica absolutely leans into that feeling. Even now, years later, there are moments where the game still makes me tense up. And what makes it stand out compared to other craft survival titles is the underwater setting itself. Most craft survivals throw you into forests, wastelands, snowy mountains, but Subnautica immediately feels different because of movement, exploration, and survival all works differently underwater. Even simple things like managing oxygen completely changes how you approach exploration. Early on, every dive feels risky because you're constantly watching the oxygen counter tick down while trying to push just a little bit further. And honestly, I think that's why the lack of heavy combat works so well. Subnautica never needed to become an action game. The exploration, crafting, and atmosphere carry the experience perfectly fine on their own. Most craft survival games are at their best when they focus on discovery and progression anyway, and this game absolutely nails that side of things. Fear also drives progression in a really smart way. A lot of the tension comes directly from the unknown. You'll hear sounds in the distance, catch movement underneath you, or you'll suddenly realise you've drifted much deeper than you intended. The audio design plays a massive part in that. Even playing handheld with just the Switch 2 speakers, the soundscape is incredible. The distant groans from the deep water, the ambient noises, even the screams from the crayfish while you desperately try to swim away. It all creates this constant feeling of tension. If you play with a decent pair of headphones, it genuinely elevates the experience massively. Coming back to Subnautica in 2026, I was genuinely surprised how fresh most of it still felt. There are definitely some visuals and mechanics that show their age slightly. You'll notice certain textures and environmental assets looking a bit rough by modern standards, and occasionally things look a bit janky up close. But overall, the game still looks fantastic. The water physics and overall aesthetics are incredible 8 years later. There are moments where sunlight cuts through the ocean surface or bioluminescence areas light up around you that still look genuinely impressive today. And again, the audio carries so much of the immersion. I've mentioned this in previous reviews, but good sound design can completely transform a game, and Subnautica is one of the best examples of that. The atmosphere still works because the game understands restraint. It doesn't constantly throw danger at you. It lets your imagination do half the work. Replay-wise, the fear absolutely still exists for me. But again, that's probably because this game directly taps into a personal fear of deep water. What revisiting the original did highlight though, is just how strong a foundation the first game created for a sequel. Subnautica already has excellent exploration and progression systems, so the opportunity for Subnautica 2 now is really expanding that crafting depth, the base building, and the world interactions even further. My biggest concern though with the sequel is whether it can create the same level of immersion and world building that made the first game so special in the first place. Early signs do look promising though. At the time of writing this review, I haven't actually touched Subnautica 2 yet because I wanted this review to stay as unbiased as possible. So if you want to see my follow-up review on Subnautica 2 later on, definitely subscribe. Story-wise, I still think the narrative is probably the weakest part of the original game. It mainly exists to guide your exploration, rather than becoming the main focus. You're probably following coordinates, investigating life pods, and uncovering information through PDAs, more than experiencing a cinematic narrative. But despite that, the ending is genuinely excellent. Without spoiling anything, the final stretch of the game is handled really well and delivers a satisfying payoff. By modern standards, the gathering and crafting system in Subnautica are actually fairly simple. Honestly, that works in the game's favour. Most crafting recipes are straightforward and easy to understand. Early progression feels natural as you unlock larger oxygen tanks, fins for faster swimming, and eventually vehicles that allow you to explore deeper areas safely. And one thing I really like is how interconnected the biomes feel. Subnautica feels like one giant sandbox rather than separated zones with obvious progression walls. Compared to games like 7 Days to Die or Valheim, where biome progression can feel very structured, Subnautica lets you naturally drift into exploration at your own pace. That's probably one of the game's biggest strengths. Progression rarely feels grindy. Most survival games follow a loop where you repeatedly farm one area just to unlock access to the next one. Subnautica still has progression requirements. It feels much more fluid and organic. You explore because you want to explore, not because the game is forcing you to. The tech tree itself is also really simple to navigate. On the Switch 2, the menus work perfectly fine handheld. Nothing ever felt awkward or frustrating to use. Exploration also naturally guides your upgrades. You'll discover new tech, vehicle fragments, crafting blueprints simply by venturing further into the world. Certain materials do require specialized equipment or deeper diving capabilities, but it all feels very naturally paced. That said, I do hope Subnautica 2 expands on the crafting systems further. The base building is also worth mentioning. It doesn't feel as important as other craft survival titles, and whilst you can customize and create something that feels like home, it's very much for functional purposes. It never felt like I needed to expand beyond my first structure, as everything was in reachable distance on the map. I also give top marks for having a blueprint system that you add mats to. This is always a top feature of mine when base building. The survival gameplay still feels modern overall, but I will admit there isn't a huge amount of jeopardy in the game outside managing your stats and avoiding a few dangerous creatures. Compared to other newer survival titles, it's definitely a simpler experience mechanically, but simplicity isn't always a bad thing. The actual story setup for Subnautica is very simple. You crash on an alien planet and need to survive. Most of the storytelling comes through PDAs, missing life pods, and environmental discovery rather than cutscenes or major dialogue moments. There are a few big story events throughout the game, like the Aurora situation early on, but overall the narrative mostly exists in the background. And honestly, I think that approach works for this game. Subnautica leans much more heavily into the environmental storytelling than direct storytelling. The world itself is what keeps you engaged. The map design is excellent, and the atmosphere created through the visuals and audio does so much of the heavy lifting. Some survival titles rely on a deep narrative to keep you invested, whereas Subnautica mainly guides your experience while letting exploration remain the main focus, and the mystery of the planet absolutely works. You're constantly drip-fed small pieces of information about what happened here, what the planet is hiding, and what's waiting deeper below the surface. When I first played the game, years ago, some of the reveals genuinely surprised me. Even now, replaying it, the world itself still carries the same sense of mystery. One of the standout features today is still the water physics and environmental design. The ocean still feels alive in a way that very few games manage to achieve. The PDA logs are what drives the story, although you don't need to actively engage with them yourself. Some objectives and locations are hidden away in sub-menu entries or data logs, so the game expects you to pay attention rather than constantly holding your hand. Personally, I actually like that approach. This is honestly where I was most surprised. Subnautica 2 runs really well on the Nintendo Switch 2. Both docked and handheld performances were genuinely solid throughout my playthrough. The only noticeable frame drops I encountered were mainly on land sections where larger environmental textures were loading in, and one audio bug where it quickly breached the water surface. Outside of that, performance was stable. You'll notice some environmental pop-in while moving around the map, especially at speed, but it never became immersion breaking for me. Load-in times are also really quickly, considering this is an 8-year-old survival title running handheld. I didn't experience any crashes, long waits, or major technical problems during my time with it. And this is where the larger Switch 2 screen really helps. Compared to the original Switch, the extra screen size makes the UI far more readable handheld. Menus, inventory management, and PDA navigation all feels comfortable to use. But more importantly, portable play genuinely suits Subnautica's gameplay loop. This is the kind of game that works really well in shorter sessions. You can jump in, gather some resources, explore a new biome, build part of your base, and then put the console down again. And weirdly enough, the smaller handheld screen almost enhances the immersion. Having the game closer to your face, alongside the audio design, creates a surprisingly tense experience. I genuinely didn't expect the handheld Subnautica experience to work so well. What's aged best is absolutely the atmosphere. The immersion, audio design, and exploration still feels fantastic today. The world design remains one of the strongest in the survival genre, and that feeling of descending deeper into unknown areas still works brilliantly. The pacing of the progression has aged really well, because it never felt overly bloated or grind heavy. Where the game does show its age slightly is in some of the visuals, animation, and quality of life systems. Certain textures and environmental assets definitely look dated now, and some navigation systems can occasionally feel a little awkward. Managing PDA information and locating objectives through menus isn't always the cleanest system either, especially compared to modern survival titles. There are also still some technical quirks here and there, with pop-in and environmental loading, but overall, very little of it genuinely damages the experience. Replaying the original absolutely increased my excitement for Subnautica 2. And whilst the stories don't necessarily connect, it's worth jumping in to become acquainted to the universe. If I'd have gone back and replayed it on PC again, I probably wouldn't have been nearly as invested. But having the ability to experience it handheld on the Switch 2 made revisiting the game feel fresh again. And if you're looking for a strong, portable survival game, this is genuinely an easy recommendation. At around £25 on the Nintendo eShop, this is an excellent port, and still a really enjoyable experience, especially considering there's currently no confirmed release date for Subnautica 2 on Nintendo hardware. If you're completely new to Subnautica, or craft survival games in general, this is absolutely worth picking up. If you've already played the original extensively and have access to a PC or Xbox, for Subnautica 2 though, you probably don't need to revisit this version unless you specifically want the handheld experience on the Switch. For me, I'm going to give Subnautica a solid 3 out of 5. The world building and sound design are excellent, and even through the Switch 2 speakers, the game creates an incredible tension and immersion. The narrative lacks some substance compared to other survival titles, but overall it still delivers a really solid craft survival experience. I probably wouldn't have returned to it if I didn't have the option to play it handheld and on the go. I'm glad I did. Thank you all for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you're planning on trying Subnautica on the Switch 2, or if you've already jumped into Subnautica 2 now that it's entered early access. And if you enjoy more reflective game reviews, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because I've got plenty more Switch 2 games lined up very soon.